He mourned for a decade, every single day, in rain, in heat, through every season, he was there. And because of him, Brazil just changed the law. This is the story of one dog's love that outlasted everything and rewrote the rules of what loyalty means in the eyes of the law. There's something about a dog that waits that breaks something open inside of you. We've all heard the stories, but this one is different. This one didn't end with a rescue or a reunion. It ended with a law. And the journey from that grief-soaked patch of earth to the halls of government is one of the most quietly extraordinary things you'll ever hear. But before we get to Brazil, though, let's hold on that word, loyalty. What does it actually mean to a dog? And here's the question that sits underneath this whole story, the one we'll come back to. Can an animal's grief be so visible, so undeniable, that it forces human beings to change their systems? We'll answer that. But first, you need to meet the dog. His name was Leao, a mixed-breed dog in Brazil, the kind of dog you might pass on a street without a second glance. His owner, Cristina Maria Cesario Santana, died in the catastrophic landslides that struck the Teresopolis region of Brazil in January 2011. It was one of the deadliest natural disasters in Brazilian history. Over 900 people lost their lives in those floods. Entire communities were swept away overnight. Families were separated. And in the chaos and the grief, Leao made his way to the cemetery where Cristina had been buried, and he lay down on her grave. He didn't leave. Photographs of Leao went around the world almost immediately. One in particular, taken just 2 days after Cristina's burial, showed Leao curled against the fresh earth, eyes heavy, body still, not pacing, not searching, just present. It's the kind of image that doesn't need a caption. You feel what it means before your brain even processes it. And that photograph did something photographs rarely do. It stayed with people. Not for a week, not for a month, for years. Because here's the thing that most people don't know. Leao didn't go home. The photograph wasn't a moment. It was the beginning of a decade. Year after year, Leao returned to that cemetery. Cristina's family, devastated themselves, continued to visit. And every time they came, Leao was already there. Or he arrived shortly after. The cemetery staff began to know him by name. The local community watched over him. He became, in the most gentle and heartbreaking way, a fixture of that place. Now pause for a second and think about that. 10 years is not instinct. 10 years is not confusion. 10 years is something we struggle to name, because we've built entire languages around human grief, but we have so few words for what an animal carries. And this is where the story shifts.
Because Leao's vigil began to spark a conversation in Brazil, a real, legal, political conversation about what rights animals have in public spaces, including cemeteries. Traditionally, animals were not permitted in cemetery grounds in many Brazilian municipalities. Leao had been tolerated because of his story, because of the attention he drew, but his presence was technically irregular, and advocates started asking, why? If a dog can grieve, and Leao proved beyond any reasonable doubt that they can, why do our laws pretend otherwise? Here's where this gets genuinely remarkable. The movement Leao inspired, and he is directly credited in the advocacy community as a catalyst, eventually contributed to legislative changes in Brazil around animal access and animal grief recognition in public memorial spaces. Municipalities began revisiting their bylaws. The idea that a grieving animal should be turned away from the grave of the person they loved became, in the light of Leao's story, not just heartless, but indefensible. Now think about what's actually happening here. We're watching a dog rewrite human law, not through a courtroom argument or a petition, but through the sheer, unbroken weight of his presence. It reminds you of something much older. There's a book, a real historical text, called Researches into the History of the British Dog, written by R. George Jesse and published in the 19th century. It's preserved in public archives and digitized through institutions like Wikimedia Commons. Jesse spent years documenting stories of dog loyalty, dog law, and the ancient relationship between humans and dogs going back to early charters and historical records. His research showed that across cultures and across centuries, humans have always known dogs grieve. Ancient laws actually made provisions for dogs in ways that acknowledge their emotional lives. Jesse found original anecdotes and historical illustrations that painted a picture of dogs not as property, but as companions with inner lives worth protecting. That book exists because humans have always, on some deep level, known what Leao proved to the modern world. The law just kept forgetting. And that's what makes this story so layered. It's not just about one dog in one grave. It's about a very long argument between what humans feel in their hearts and what their legal systems are willing to admit. Leao did not live to see the full weight of the change he sparked. He died, as dogs do, far too soon relative to the size of the love they give, after years of his vigil. But by then, the photographs, the stories, the global attention had already set something in motion that couldn't be undone. He left behind more than grief. He left behind evidence. Undeniable, decade-long evidence that dogs love in ways that matter. And here's the payoff to that question we opened with. Can an animal's grief be so visible that it forces human systems to change? Leao answered it.
Not with a bark or a whimper, with 10 years of showing up, 10 years of lying on cold ground, because the alternative, not being near her, was unthinkable. There is no cleaner definition of love than that. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own dog, your own pet, the quiet way they carry things we don't always see, tell us about it in the comments below. We read every single one. What's the most loyal thing your pet has ever done? We genuinely want to know. And if this story gave you something today, if it reminded you why animals matter in ways that go far beyond companionship, hit that like button. It really does help us find more stories just like this one and bring them to people who need to hear them. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're here every week with stories that prove the world is more tender than the news would have you believe.